Okay, it is 4:03. So we'll go ahead and call to order the Community Planning and Transportation Committee meeting for July 30th, 2020. This committee hasn't met, I think, since February, actually. And this is the committee where we, every month, get updates on our transit ridership and have a general discussion about public transit and other transportation and planning type issues going on in the city of Norman. So since we took over the public transit system in Norman, we really haven't met in half the time that we've been running the system. So I am very excited to have an opportunity to get an update on what's been going on with public transit ridership. That's always generally the first item on the CPT agenda is an update from our transit staff on what's going on. So we have a couple items on the agenda to go over today. And so we'll go ahead and get started, and others may join in with us as we go along. So I think Taylor and Sean are here to discuss transit.
All right, can you hear me? Well, thank you, Councilmember Holman. Happy to be here and having this meeting going again, and happy to provide you guys an update on where we are in this first fiscal month of the new year. So I'm quickly going to go through the report that's in your agenda packet and just highlight a few things. And then, as always, happy to go over any questions that you may have that weren't touched on or dive into anything in the report. So for fixed route ridership in June last month, we had just over 13,000 riders, which was a 27% decrease compared to June 2019 when the university was still operating the system. And you'll see most ridership is down for both paratransit and fixed route due to less seating capacity on the buses and people generally just not getting out as more due to the pandemic. So I'll continue. Fiscal year 20 ridership for fixed route came in at 263,455, which was a 12% decrease over fiscal year 19. So not a lot. I think if the pandemic hadn't happened, we'd be right at pretty close to what we were last year. But as everyone knows, we had to make some adjustments to our service. So a decrease of 12% is where we landed. For paratransit, jumping down there about half the page, we had just over 1,000 riders in June, which was about a 50% decrease from last year's June. And then fiscal year ridership for paratransit came in at 19,000, and that was a 41% decrease over last year. And if you would like, please look at those graphs for both fixed route and paratransit. I think they help tell the story for where we were going throughout the fiscal year, and that sharp decrease starting in April, and then now we've started to climb back up in May and June. At the bottom of the first page on the update that's in your agenda is an update on our long-range plan consultant and contract. Council approved that contract on July 14th, and it consists of traditional planning, so short, medium, long-range service, similar to what you all know, and capital recommendations. The university CART 2008 plan was slightly updated in 2014 and included in the comprehensive transportation plan when it was adopted in May of 2014. And so we really feel that this is a major step for us as a transit system in its infancy under a new operator to really digest who we are now and be able to come back out in about 11 months and say this is where the city, the citizens, and stakeholders really see in short and long range future. So we're very excited for that to begin, that process to begin. We had a kickoff meeting last Friday with city staff and the consultant Nelson Nygaard, which is a national planning firm that does this work all across the country. Next steps that we identified in that kickoff meeting, we're going to get some data to Nelson Nygaard various metrics that they need to just evaluate the existing system. And then we'll be receiving a public outreach plan from Nelson Nygaard, which, as you can guess, is probably more of a task than it used to be during times like this. So lots of virtual recommendations we're assuming, and creative ways to get feedback from the community. We're hoping to at least be able to accommodate some in-person meetings and be able to get some participation from riders on the bus, but we're going to let the experts come back with us with a public outreach plan and then go from there. And then on the second page, we just have a few updates. Like Councilmember Holman said, we haven't met since February, so I just kind of want to go through some big ticket items that we've been working on as a staff. We continued the work on the design of the operations and maintenance facility that will be constructed on North Base. We're very close to having those plans finalized and getting those documents out to bid. We probably one of our biggest things that happened over the last few months was we did get the FTA FY20 operations grant funded, and we drew down those funds and were able to get that done during last fiscal year. So we're very excited that we got our first grant in the books and we're able to get the expenses reimbursed. And the City Council knows that we submitted for these two competitive grants because we went to council for some endorsement and a resolution, but we did submit for a battery electric bus for one grant, and for a second grant we submitted for a vehicle wash facility and CNG replacement vehicles. The first grant application for a battery electric bus was not selected. The awards were announced, and unfortunately we didn't make it to the funding table at this time, but we're going to learn from this application and continue competing for those competitive grants. And then the second one, the announcements have not been made yet, so we're still waiting FTA to make the decision on those. And then the staff began working on the FY21 grant. As you all know, we are in FY21 and very close to getting that grant obligated to the City of Norman so we can start drawing down on those funds for expenses beginning this fiscal year. And then Councilmember Holman, you wanted to update on the bus stop out near Crest.
Yes.
You requested that at our July 14th meeting or council meeting. And we have been, that is a private road, just to give everybody a little bit of an update. I know we haven't talked about it in a while, but that road that runs out there by Crest, not 24th, but the access road is a private road. And we do stop there now. There is not a bus stop sign. We've been working on this for it feels like many years, ever since I was at the university. But we have gotten the developer to agree to allow us to put down a bus stop sign. And we're just waiting in the next couple of weeks for our new bus stop signs to be manufactured and produced, and we'll be getting those up. So we're very excited to announce that for you, Councilmember Holman, that we will be putting a sign up there.
Thank you.
And then last, just a little upcoming, August 10th, we'll have our first day where the commuter route between Norman and Oklahoma City will be operated solely by Embark and that OKC garage. And they're going through a public comment period, but they are expanding the route from 6 runs daily, which is currently being offered between the two entities, to 9 runs daily. So they're beefing up the service there, and hopefully be able to draw in some more riders that can use the service because it'll be more frequent. And then August 15th will be our first Saturday service day since January the 1st of 2019, when the university had to cut that service for funding issues. And it'll be very similar, exactly the same as what we have had in the past. It'll operate from 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. With Zone 1 paratransit service serving the citizens as well in that time frame. We will also be operating on game days, and like the rest of the community, we're not sure what what game days will look like right now, but we have a plan to operate out of a temporary bus hub away from the university on those days if the game days are anything like they have been in the past. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions or dive into more discussion on any of these items.
So I appreciate all that information and the update. What I guess is our current status with the university on using their facilities, the transfer station and the bus maintenance facility? And I'm not sure if I caught the expected completion we're thinking for our transfer facility, for our maintenance facility and the transfer facility. Really, I mean, we're not as far ahead on that one as we are the maintenance facility, but maybe just an update on where we are on those issues.
Yeah, happy to do that, and if Sean would like to chime in here in a second. But we, like I said, are close to getting those 100% construction documents done for the maintenance operations facility, and our current lease extension with the university for their space there is through December 31st, and we are doing everything in our power to meet that obligation. And as we get closer, as we start turning some dirt and seeing what the timeline is, we'll probably be coming back to you in this committee and giving an update so we can, look at our options further on what we need to do to continue the operations as they are as construction gets started. For the transfer facility, we're still using the university's transfer facility, and I haven't heard of any issues with us continue to do that. As you know, council allocated some funding for, I think it was $850,000 for acquisition and some alteration costs that may be needed for a transfer facility, and we're currently looking at locations. And part of the long-range planning that Nelson Nygaard is doing is looking at transfer station siting for us, and there isn't really a timeline on that, I would say, just because there's nothing hard line, or we haven't purchased anything or anything like that. So,
okay,
Sean, if you have any updates, please feel free to chime in.
I might add to that. Thank you, Taylor, and the council members. So again, the site there in the downtown has been identified. Actually, it was identified in our RFP before we even selected Nelson Nygaard as a prime location. Council gave us the green light to proceed with the due diligence on the acquisition. Our legal team is doing that. And really the last step in that process is to confirm through our long-range plan and our route analysis that that's going to work. We think it will. We think it's a great site. It's perfectly located in central Norman and near the depot for the RTA development in the future. So we think it works really well, but there's a lot of other factors to consider when you're looking at the transfer facility. So that's the beauty of the Nelson Nygaard study, to let us have that outside party to take a look at that and confirm that that location will work perfectly for all the other route considerations in the future. So timing is good. Nothing is lost. The funding is there. No major movement this week I'm aware of regarding the property, but I know Catherine Walker and her team are working hard to keep us at the table for that acquisition.
And I appreciate that, Sean. And so, especially during the pandemic and everything going on, and we're still in the infancy of running our own transit system. Would you say that, the system is running smoothly in a sense, I guess, especially since we took it over and we started to figure out some things and stuff like that?
No, I appreciate that. We're really proud of what we've accomplished. It's amazing how fast that first year went by and all the challenges that we faced. I mean, it's really a remarkable undertaking by the city of Norman, I think, to not just to survive a year of running a complicated system like this without really any background in doing that, but to do it with our budget. As you know, we took a $5 million hit there, and without any automatic guarantees we were going to get the FTA grant funding, and we sure didn't know if we would ever be able to pass a sales tax election, which we did in November. So it's kind of a blur, to be honest with you, but I think the proof is in the pudding. The buses never stopped running a single day. We never missed a single service, including during the COVID period. We brought the program in under budget in FY20, not to mention all the challenges we face with an aging fleet and all of that. And I think we've kind of landed at the end of the year, having worked out so many of the bugs, that we didn't anticipate, including our own staffing challenges, fleet maintenance challenges, and so on. So we feel like we're starting our second year of the operation on a much stronger footing. We're thrilled about this maintenance facility. We're hoping to take bids in August on that. And the only thing I'd add to Taylor's comments there was that, we do have an end of a lease at OU on December 31st. We're pretty certain we're not going to make that in terms of occupancy of this building. We think the building will be well on its way, but we don't suspect that we're going to be quite at the point of occupying and operating there. So there will be the negotiations with OU to try to extend that lease. I'm thinking February, March, sometime around that time. We'll know more once we get the bids in on the facility. On that point, I might mention, if you haven't seen it, I know council has received it, but Annalise and her team did a beautiful job on this 7-page bond election pamphlet that is hitting the streets, I think, yesterday and today. And there's an architectural rendering in there. If you haven't spotted it, I encourage you to take a look at that. It's a beautiful rendering of what this facility will look like, in addition to the parks maintenance facility, in addition to the wash facility, if that gets funded through the federal grant. So if you want to get an idea of what it is this thing is going to look like and how it might function, there's a really beautiful picture in that flyer that we developed with our architects to try to illustrate it better. And then that all said, I want to give a lot of credit to Taylor. Thank God for Taylor to get us through all these challenges, and our partners at Embark. But he was the one who really worked through this FTA grant program. And I won't even start telling you the complications of trying to do that in the federal agency system. But we did secure that $2 million grant, and he's figured out a way to get everything done out of that allocation before the fiscal year ended. So Mr. Francisco was sleeping much better in June once we were able to get all of those reimbursements back in the program. And again, that's going to reflect really positively in your end balance of FY20, in addition to obviously the TIF sales revenues as well. So I think our FY20 budget end of year is going to look much better than we thought it might back in the beginning of that fiscal year. So thank you for the chance to share, but that's kind of my best assessment of sort of what's happened in the last 13 months.
Absolutely. I really appreciate that, Sean, and Taylor, for all your work as well. Do any of the council members have any questions, comments out there? I can't see the thing. I think Ellen and Cindy are operating the...
So far, not. Nobody has asked.
Okay.
I don't see my hand raised thing on the. I'll search for it, but if you don't mind me hopping in,
Please.
Holman,
Yes, Councilmember Patron.
can you tell us what the plan is for adding new buses to the fleet? With just go ahead and get on the record with the capital budget for next year, and what we see in out years, even from not this coming year, but the next coming forward, what we anticipate on adding to the fleet, phasing out the old and coming in with the new.
Yeah, let me take a shot at that, Councilmember, and Taylor can maybe fill in after I'm done. He mentioned the application for the electric bus grant that we were unsuccessful in getting, so we were hoping that might be one of our big bus replacements. Again, those are very expensive buses, and also a movement into the electric bus world, which is coming on pretty quickly. We were able, on the other hand, to get an ACOG grant, Federal Transportation Funds, for a bus replacement. So that was a positive surprise. Those funds will come available October 1st. So we will be replacing one of our large buses with federal grants through ACOG. And then our budget also provides one other replacement for a large bus. And again, our budget turned out pretty well in FY20, and council approved a nice budget in FY21, partially because of that sales tax that the voters approved last November. So we're on our way to replacing, I think, 3 or 4, one fixed route and 2 or 3 or 4 paratransit route buses in this fiscal year, which is much more than we thought we would be able to do. So we're making really, really good progress on the fleet replacement program sooner than expected. I'll be honest with you, this week we have almost missed what they call making the lineup. That's the term they use in the business, making the lineup every morning. Do we have enough buses to operate? And we almost missed lineup twice this week already because those old buses are breaking down due to the heat and just summer wear and tear. So we're not out of the woods. We've got a long way to go. Even when we do get the funding for these buses, there's a delivery time of sometimes 12 to 14 months. So we'll catch up here. I think we're going to start to catch up this year. And as Taylor said, we're going to pursue every other grant opportunity we can find to try to make up the difference here. Taylor, anything else I missed?
Yeah, I'd just like to mention that and echo what Sean said, that we're going to try for every grant application that we can for capital. And there was actually an announcement a couple weeks ago, the Volkswagen settlement grant through Oklahoma DEQ for over-the-road vehicles, including transit vehicles. So staff is looking at that, trying to put together some application for that to go to council for a resolution of approval. So just want to mention that grant, that you might be seeing that next month, or the due date is September 30th, so we still got a little bit of time. And there's also the opportunity, there were some unused capital funds that the university hadn't used through their grant allocation. And so we're looking at programming those funds for bus replacements as well. So like Sean said, I think we'll be looking really good in the next year or two. It's just there's a lot of lead time for these big buses, and it depends on who's ordering them. I think for the 2 new Gilligs that we ordered from when I was at the university, it actually took about 18 months to get them in after we issue the PO. So there's a lot of lag time between getting them ordered and getting them in, but that's why we got to get on it quickly.
Okay.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Any other comments, questions from council about? Okay. All right, then we will move on to item number 2 on the agenda. And it is in regard to female cottonwood trees. I was contacted by some neighbors in the Eagle Cliff Edition about some issues they're having with cottonwood trees, one of which is on neighbor's property, one of which is on a city property, from what I understand. And our forester, I had the resident send me an email about it. I forwarded that to our staff, and staff responded that there may need to be a policy change in order to address this issue. So I asked that this be put on the agenda to see if this is a minor change or if it's something that is actually more extensive than I think. So anyway, we've got Tim Vermillion, it looks like, on the call, and so we'll let staff take over the presentation from here.
Good afternoon, everyone. As Councilmember Holman said, I was getting contacted by several people, Eagle Cliff, Hall Park area, and it was because the female cottonwoods were seeding out, and a lot of the people were unable to handle it themselves. There was one lady whose husband is on the road all the time, and she's pregnant and has kids at home, and her gutters were filled with cottonwood seed, her yard, and she was worried about a fire hazard. I went and looked at it, and what we tell people is, they're your trees. You need to take care of them yourself. But in her case, she can't get on the roof and clean out the gutters. So I don't really know of a solution for trees on private property, but if we as a city are contributing to people's problems by having female cottonwoods on public property, we could probably do something about it. But they're usually not unhealthy. They're just doing their thing, spreading seed. But I wouldn't feel comfortable sending a crew out to cut a tree on private property or a public property just because somebody doesn't like what it does. But we are creating a burden on people by having female cottonwoods on public property. So I told some of those people, I said, look, the best thing to do is contact your council member and we can get the ball rolling studying this issue. And the problem with cottonwoods is, first, they do so much for us, but the things they don't do for us is they contribute to, asthma. My wife has severe asthma. She can't stand this time of year. And, they drop limbs a lot. And it's mainly the seed dispersal. So you cannot discern the difference between a male and a female cottonwood, except for just right before they disperse their seed. So if we did have any kind of program, we would need to identify them when they're casting their seed, and then mark them for the future to know when we could remove them, to know which ones to remove. And that's about the extent of my discussion on it. How do you guys feel about that?
So, yes, please, Councilor Patron.
So just for my clarification, do both males and females drop the cotton, but only, or I didn't understand. We have cottonwoods all out here in Ward 3. In my
It's
neighborhood.
only females, ma'am.
Okay, so the dropping the seed is the ones that drop the cotton. That is the seed.
Yeah, the females, they're the ones who cast the seed. And the interesting thing is, well, probably not interesting to everyone, but to me, the flowers that hang down both look the same until right before they cast their seed. So it's hard to tell the difference until you're feeling the effects of it.
Okay, and this is the one, everybody's highly allergic to the females, right?
Yeah,
For a lot of
some
people.
people. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, I'll pass on back to Councilman Holman.
So yeah, that just, we're for years now. I mean, for a long time, Norman has been a big supporter of trees. We've been trying to beef up ordinances to protect trees, to encourage more trees. So, of course, having a discussion about how to reduce a certain type of tree is something I'm, treading lightly. I want more trees in Norman, especially for shade and so many other reasons. But when a resident did bring this particular problem they're having to me, I felt like we did need to have a discussion about it and why or why not we should do anything about it. I think you've identified some reasons why we should. I'd definitely like to hear what other members of the council might have to think, if they've heard anything or had any experience with this type of issue. I don't have any around my house that have caused any problem that I know of, but definitely hearing from a few residents about it. Is there anybody have any?
I'm happy to share our
Yeah.
experience over here. Mr. Vermillion is familiar with cottonwood tree row here in Cambridge. My understanding is that many were put in the late 90s because they're fast growing, a large tree. Is that right, Mr. Vermillion?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so you can have like a quick growing tree canopy, but and that's kind of the pluses for them. But they do, I will tell you, I have never dealt with, I have two, one in the front and one in the back. And the one in the back is likely going to have to be removed, but they drop something year round. It's not like most other trees where they only drop leaves in the fall. They're constantly dropping sticks or this sticky seed stuff that gets all over your feet and gets your hair matted, or they're dropping cotton, or they're dropping leaves. It is a constant year-round issue. So I love that they tower and provide a beautiful tree line, but you don't have to live under them very long before you get really irritated by them. So, I mean, I wish they were oaks, but I know that those take a really long time to grow. So I would be curious to know what other kinds of trees can grow quickly that we might steer developers towards that type of tree canopy, a different one than cottonwoods, because they can be really irritating.
Yeah.
Maybe. Mr. Rebellion, could you give us kind of an idea of that? Or Mr. Peacock, maybe you could tell us?
I actually know that they make a cottonless Cottonwood variety now that does all the great things you say, but doesn't drop the seeds, doesn't drop the limbs. It's definitely, I mean, it's hard to swap out one for the other, but I think going forward, it's a great solution. So
Yeah, that's a male. All that is a male cultivar.
there you go. See, I learned
Yeah.
something.
And so
Yeah,
I would,
Go ahead. Sorry.
I would just say I would encourage, since we're really talking about this being an issue on public property, like a park, for example, I would definitely, if we were going to remove them or have a policy that they could be removed, want to replace them with the male version, or have a policy that for every one we remove, we have to replace it with something.
Yeah.
And the male version, provides the same benefits and without the problems, that I think that would be a pretty good solution. But please, if you have further to add.
Well, I wouldn't go for a replacement of a cottonwood just because they do drop a lot of limbs, and you need to have trees in parks that are the safest because of all the people that are in them,
Sure.
So I wouldn't go back with the cottonwood, but I will tell you, I know a lot about them. My first job out of college, I worked for West Vaco, and my bosses were 3 scientists. They were geneticists, PhDs, and we worked on cottonwood. And we could grow an 18-inch cutting, which is a stick with no roots, in 1 year, 20 feet tall. That's pretty fast. They were getting fertilized 3 times a day and watered 3 times a day in the growing season. But so they're just such a great tree and rapid growing, but it's not the right tree for our parks. As we develop parks and they're existing cottonwoods, that's fine. But, they'll eventually might need to come out. But
Are they native to this area?
oh, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, very much so. They
I
go
don't
all
know
the
if
way.
they were an invasive or just came in or whatever at some point.
Yeah, they're native. The largest tree in the state is a cottonwood. So
Okay.
they're a great tree, just in the right spot.
I see.
Yeah.
So what would you recommend what policy action we need to take to address this in a way that you would feel comfortable?
What I want to do is make sure that as a city, we're not contributing to people's issues, by leaving a female's cottonwood on public property. If it's a big park, it's not a big deal. If there's no neighborhoods around it, not a big deal. Leave it alone. But for instance, in that strange kind of in-holding over there in Eagle Cliff, there's some massive cottonwoods, and they're so close to their backyards. And I didn't believe her until I went over there, and it looks like it snowed. And so I said, you have a real problem. But more so, the bigger problem for her is her neighbor's tree. And, that's between them. I don't think we can ever get into that. But
Right.
So I've been perusing different ordinances. Oklahoma City actually has an ordinance that says you can't plant cottonwoods, but I don't think anybody listens to that. And nobody plants them either. They're volunteers usually. On our tree farm, we sold every one we had to T. Boone Pickens, and he bought hundreds of them for his ranch, but they were males. They were Siouxland, like Mr. Peacock was mentioning, Siouxland cottonwood. So the right tree in the right spot. To answer your question, what I think is the best choice of replacement is an American elm, a Dutch elm disease resistant. And there are several in the trade right now, but the best one is called Prairie Expedition out of, it was discovered, some plant hunters followed Lewis and Clark's path, and they periodically took, sorry, I'm going all Cliff Clavin on you, but
No, please.
they took some expeditions during their river trip into the prairie. And on this, repeat trip these plant hunters did, they found a giant colony of American elms, and they were all dead but one. And so they took cuttings and they propagated it, and it's a Dutch elm disease resistant prairie form American elm, which is the low growing wide ones that you see around OU periodically. And it's the same shape. And so that's what I'm trying to push. I planted several in Norman already, and I think those would be a good replacement. And it's as native as you can get.
That's the big one in my backyard, right?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Okay.
So they grow tall?
Please. Who is it?
They
Wait.
grow tall?
Oh, yeah.
That you're talking about?
They get huge, ma'am.
Okay.
but they get wider. They're prairie form, so they're just broad and low because of all the wind. So the ones that are short have evolved to pass on that short stature because they evolved in the prairie versus the East Coast. You know, Princeton, New Jersey is real famous for their American elms, but they stick straight up and go like that. Our American elms go like this.
Mhm.
So you want that in Oklahoma, not that.
The other thing, kind of on topic or not, but if we're going to be looking at chopping out trees in parks, I know other cities have done, you know, a buyout program basically on Bradford pears because they cause such damage during storms, and it's a source of having to go back and clean up after them, taking down power lines and all kinds of stuff. So I wonder if in this conversation, if we might include Bradford pears and then working with maybe the power companies to help do a resident buyback program, so that if there are people that want to get rid of certain trees that are only in the category of what, you know, the city might say is worth getting rid of, and meaning Bradford pears.
Yeah.
That might be something that we could look into as well. Councilmember Holman, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I'd like to see that as well. I would agree.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I've never heard of that. That's really good. Would that be for people's private property?
They have, so I would say that we can definitely do it for city-owned property, but you don't do the buyback program under city-owned. It's deciding, you know, the council would have to talk about what, and, you know, if there's a grant that maybe could come from the power companies, it cuts down on the city having to do private contracting for storm cleanup because Bradford pears are so susceptible to splitting and causing major problems. So if, I know you can, you'll find other cities, I think Kansas, some cities there did it, and I think there's even some in Oklahoma that, yes, so you get maybe a partnership between the city of Norman and these power companies or whatever, and then we'll remove it, but also say, you know, we'll buy the next tree or whatever, but we're getting rid of them, and then you also ban them with developers and say, you know, you can't plant any new, these end up costing the city money in the long run because the next big windstorm that comes through, then we have to contract to come pick up the tree. So eventually the city's going to end up with the tree anyway, so we would rather pay you and take it out ourselves and maybe give you a new tree or pay you $100 for the tree and we'll remove it, you know, whatever it ends up being. You could look at those different programs. I just know that they have been very popular in Tornado Alley, those programs. So I would just say if we're going to look at zeroing in on certain trees that we consider a nuisance for whatever reason, and I've lived under Cottonwood, and I know people who suffer from allergies, like my daughter, it's hard. And I would just encourage us to also look at the ones that truly are costing the city a lot of money in storm damage cleanup. But I want to make sure that we're putting them in something else. Like if they're a part of the program, then they need to plant one of these American elms or whatever that we're supplying. We don't want to just jerk out trees without replacement.
Yeah, I definitely want to make sure we replace any trees ever that we take out. That's what I would, some sort of policy that even requires it. I'm not sure that says it. Take out a tree, we got to put one back in somewhere or close.
Councilmember Peacock may be familiar with, Councilmember Peacock may be familiar with one of those programs from other cities. I don't know, or developers can't.
Well, I know Oklahoma City's got they have a pre-approved required landscaping list, and basically if it's not on that list, you can't plant it. So I don't know if Norman has something like that, but that's a great first step. And yeah, get rid of Bradford pears. They're nothing but a nuisance.
I've heard about Bradford pears since I was a kid here in Norman, them being a problem anyway. So,
and they stink.
Okay, do we think this needs to come, any policy change, this might need to come back to this committee or to a study session? Any thoughts on that from anybody?
Well, what I want is a kind of a, as we used to call, a warm fuzzy, that if I have to remove a tree because it's a health issue on public land, what is my, I mean, there's nothing that says we can't do that, but we all know people in Norman love trees, and there's people that there's a guy over here and another lady that call me all the time, frequently in tears when they see trees being removed. And there's a lot of those, and then there's others that they don't even notice. But
Right.
what is my response? What is our policy on removing trees on public property if they're healthy? The tree's not sick,
yeah,
it's not hazardous.
I think your point about the cause of harm to others, it would be the main issue for me, is that if it's causing harm to neighbors or people around it, that would be a concern to me. I would never want to support removing a tree just because somebody said, I just don't like it. It's
Right.
ugly or whatever. But if some of those health issues you've mentioned are about the specific type of tree, are significant, in many places outside of just the neighborhood in Ward 7, then I would, still have, caution about it, like you would about removing any tree anytime. But if it is causing health problems and other issues for people, property damage, things like that, I would say we would have some responsibility to address it.
Right. Yes, sir. And what I hear when I ask others, there's kind of two sides of the coin. There as well. I own a house that gets filled up with cottonwood in my air conditioner compressor. I go out and clean it once a week. Everyone should do that. But there are people who can't do that. So
Exactly.
What do you do for those people? So we do have some responsibility somewhere to help them alleviate some of that.
And if it's, and I think the key thing too being that if it's coming from public property, that's, we can't do anything about. If it's your neighbor's tree, then that really is an issue you're going to have to work out with them. But if it is a public property issue that we do have the ability to address, then I think in those limited cases we should.
Yeah.
But
The other thing I would say, I'm more,
Councilmember Patron.
it's not the fact that they drop stuff to me, the property side of it, the property damage side of it, every tree drops something. I mean, that's how they propagate. But to me, it's that it's such a high allergen. And on that note, I mean, how far do we want to go with this? Red cedars are another one that, people, it's invasive and makes people really sick. So how far do we want to take this? I think this is something that we do. I would like for him to be able to study this, Stephen, and bring it back to us before you would go to a study session, because if you're talking about, how do we get a proper tree canopy that doesn't make people sick and doesn't have as much property damage associated with it, then we probably need to look at other cities and what they're doing. And then also just with the Bradford pear, because they are just, it's a trash tree. I mean, it was popular for a little minute, and the ones that are still around, we're just waiting for them to have enough storm damage to, we're going to end up getting this tree at the compost facility eventually. So what does it destroy in the meantime? But I think I would like to give him the opportunity to look at what some other cities are doing with tree programs.
Okay.
Good. I do have one comment on Bradford's, and that is, you don't see cottonwoods necessarily taking over abandoned fields. You see Bradford's by the millions. When you drive Hefner Parkway north in the spring around past Northwest 150th, there's probably a 150-acre pasture. It's Bradford's as far as the eye can see. And they're invading old fields. They call them old fields, just, abandoned pastures all over Oklahoma and Texas. So to me, Bradford's they do a great job, but then they're short-lived. But the real problem is the U.S. government said you cannot bring these calorie pears into America unless they're from this latitude, and everyone agreed to that. And then years later, they brought in other calories from different latitudes, which allowed them to pollinate and produce fruit, because they're supposed to be fruitless. So those gets bird dispersed, and then secondly, pears are grafted onto regular pear rootstock, which is the ones with the thorns. And so the top dies, then the rootstock pops up, and now you have dispersed pears all over the place. So there's a twofold problem. So to me, Bradford's a way worse problem than Cottonwood, but they're not so bad on your allergies. I'm just kind of spouting off information here, but.
No, I appreciate it. Any other comments from other council about
I'll just touch on something that
Councilmember Peacock? Yeah.
Yeah, Councilmember Patron mentioned. You know, she made the comment, every tree drops something, and that started making me think, well, this is a real slippery slope. You know, what?
Yeah.
Who's to say we're not cleaning out people's gutters every year when the leaves fall? It's just, you know, because every leaf could come from a public tree. So I think you got to be really, really careful. It's a tightrope act, but something that definitely should be discussed.
Yeah, I'd like for it to come back here first. We need
Okay.
to, before it would go to full council.
I would agree with that. Okay, is there any further comment about this particular? Okay, then I would look for this to come back next month, or let us know before the next month's meeting agenda time if you think it's ready, or something is ready to come back to this committee.
Okay.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Tim. I really appreciate all your knowledge and work on this. It really helps. And I'm glad that we have your position back on staff. So
Me too.
yeah.
Keep the lights on.
Okay. So we will go ahead then and move on to item number 3, which is a discussion related to the temporary use of parking lots under and/or spaces for outdoor dining uses. Some history behind this is just that a lot of cities have been doing this before even COVID-19, really, to encourage more to use less parking spaces for cars and encourage more outdoor dining and more activity on the streets and things like that. But especially since COVID-19, a lot of cities have been encouraging, due to reduced capacity of indoor seating for restaurants. In some states, there's no indoor seating allowed at all. And so they are converting parking spaces in parking lots and street parking into temporary outdoor seating. So we've had some requests to talk about that in Norman, about our current policy about how that would work, if it could work, and what we might need to do if we want it to work. So I think Catherine, our city attorney, has some stuff.
Got just a couple of PowerPoint slides I tried to share it a second ago, and I don't think it worked.
Yeah, I saw it come on for a second there. Yeah.
Okay, maybe it did work. Okay. So can you all see that? Okay.
Yes.
So as Councilmember Holman said, across the country, cities are getting creative to help small businesses who are impacted by COVID-19 restrictions. Even though we don't have any gathering restrictions or percentage reductions like we've had before, we do have some restrictions that could impact a restaurant's utilization of their space. Certainly if they social distance their tables, that can become an issue and they lose some capacity. So we began expediting sidewalk cafe permits and encouraging restaurants to begin utilizing that sidewalk space, provided there was still an accessible pathway. Back in June, we've had a few restaurants take advantage of that, maybe not as many as we thought would, but some have. And as Councilmember Holman said, a number of cities have been going even further and utilizing parking lots and spaces to extend those dining areas. It allows for better spacing and capacity. And I've got some pictures. Some of these are from Colorado, I believe. You can see the different ways they've marked off these areas. Clearly, these are going to be more in your downtown areas, places like that, where your restaurants tend to be smaller. And you can see here they've marked off the parking areas with these concrete barriers to address safety issues. In Pikes Peak, or probably Colorado Springs area on Pikes Peak Road, looks like they closed the entire road down. So as we look at this, of course, there's a number of issues to consider. Safety first and foremost, probably. We want the sidewalk to remain accessible to patrons walking in the area. We want to protect the dining areas from traffic. Other things to consider include giving up those parking spaces. What's the impact to the area and losing that public parking? With their ABLE license, they need to be in front of the licensed restaurant. The license can extend if they're directly in front of the restaurant. And you know, we want to make sure there's coordination with adjacent properties who maybe share this parking in the main street or campus corner type scenarios. And then what kind of process we need to go through to implement something like this, if that's what you all are interested in doing. I will say, Campus Corner is a place that utilizes a parking variance process often, and that's something that's filed with the police department. They look at it, they look at the safety issues, and occasionally they can grant a variance for a couple of days for an event or for some other happening. And we could use a very similar process to that here, I think. It looks at barriers and safety issues and things like that. When we close streets, we provide notice to all of the property owners, you know, when we do the music festival and things like that. And that is always a challenge with those adjacent businesses. If they're not a restaurant, they don't really want to lose their parking for more seating for you maybe. So that's just something we want to consider. And I know we've got Sarah Kaplan here who helps with our special events process. She did the Sidewalk Cafe permits. We've got Angelo and Sean here from public safety street function standpoint. And so we're happy to answer any questions or just go straight for the discussion.
Let's see. I appreciate that, Catherine. I was in Boulder, Colorado recently and noticed throughout their downtown that they had several on-street angled parking spaces that were blocked off, and restaurants had marked it off and had seating out there. And that was probably the city I saw it the most in that was comparable to Norman anyway that I've seen. So we might look into some of what their policy is on it as well in Boulder.
Yeah, and I'm friends with their city attorney, so I can get that pretty easily. I was on a CLE just before this as a presenter, and we were talking about issues with COVID-19, and this came up, and I mentioned we were going to be talking about this, and someone from, I think, I'm blanking on the name, Fort something. Anyway, she was on there. She said, in Colorado, we just adopted.
Fort Collins, probably, yeah.
Fort Collins, that's what it is. Fort Smith's, Oklahoma. So Fort Collins, and she sent me their regulations right then and there, so I've got those. And
yeah, I noticed in Boulder that the streets were open. They do, of course, have the pedestrian mall in the middle of their downtown also, but where I noticed these little parklets, the street was still open to traffic, and they had cordoned it off that way. One of the things I did want to mention as well is that the Center City policy actually identifies these parklets, and in the concept drawings of Gray Street, the two-way Gray Street, it actually shows the angled parking spaces being used as restaurant outdoor seating, as in, again, one of the concept drawings in the Center City handbook. So we have talked about this specifically in Norman before as well, and it's just, again, something I've noticed cities kind of increasingly encouraging and allowing in light of COVID-19 restrictions. Is there any comments or questions from council about the presentation, Catherine? Councilmember Peacock, I see there.
I just have a comment. This is actually one of the topics I wanted to talk about during our council retreat. So I'm really excited that we got to kind of breach the subject today. I know we've talked a lot about restaurants being able to use this, but I think retail has just as much of an opportunity to take advantage of something like this. And I actually went through Main Street from basically Don Size Realty down to Porter and kind of mapped where all the retail and restaurants were in comparison to all the office and other uses. And it's actually pretty well balanced. So I feel like if you dedicated this only to restaurant retail, that there would still be enough parking left over for those other uses, that the difference would be negligible is kind of what I'm getting at. So I'd be happy to share that little graphic I made with anybody. Just feel free to ask.
Yeah, I'd like to see it for sure. Okay, anybody else have any comments, questions?
Just for the record, the parking spaces are not, they don't belong to, it's not something that the stores and the restaurants have leased themselves. They're city spaces, such that for Councilmember Peacock's, what he's come up with or what we're talking about here, they're subject to city policies. It's not something that they have a property right to, correct?
That's the way I understand it.
That's
Downtown oh, go ahead.
I mainly identified them just for a, just kind of a use count, just to see what the balance was between the two types.
No, I think it's great.
Councilor-
Catherine could probably tell. Those are city streets, right? So we don't have to worry about them getting necessarily legally mad at us.
No, we just know from experience when we've closed the streets down for Norman Music Fest and things, that's been controversial for some businesses. We've been sued over it before, over the petition process. So it tends to make some people unhappy. I think Music Fest has kind of worked out over time because it became such a huge event, but I don't really know how these businesses would react. I think probably it would be a good conversation to have with the Downtowners Association if we're talking about Main Street.
If I may, Councilmember, that's what we do. We get these requests more intermittently by businesses or by block from time to time. So we're very careful to get with those associations. And in the downtown, it's the Norman Downtowners Association we try to work with. I know Sarah and I attend those meetings regularly. And then in Campus Corner, it's the Merchants Association there. We just try to make sure we're touching base and making sure they're on board with us so that we're not affecting their businesses or special events that they're having. They're very sensitive to loss of parking. That may not be the case now with COVID, but we really try hard to get them on board before we ever take it over. You are correct. It is the city's land and right of way, and it's our authority to do that if you wanted to apply your police powers to. We just really don't do that as a general practice. But if I might mention one more thing that council will need to kind of wrestle with here too. When there's a special event like this, we have lots of them during normal times. These event planners pay for the traffic control and signage and barricades, and we many times do it for them, so they're just paying for city labor and equipment. But it could get pretty expensive to do those concrete barriers. We don't own any of those, so we'd have to rent those as well. Anyway, something to think about as you pursue this. The cost of this could be fairly pricey, and I'm sure the merchants will not want to pay that. So something that we need to sort out.
Okay. No, I wasn't trying to force anybody into something. I just was trying to make sure that we weren't wading off into something that I was unaware of. I definitely think you get the downtowners and the Campus Corner merchants. Everybody should definitely be a part of the process.
Yes, I would agree. And I do just want to clarify the intent of this specific policy. As much as I support closing streets down and pedestrian walkways and malls in the future, this particular policy, the intent is not to close streets down. It is just to allow commercial retail or restaurant businesses to utilize the parking spaces that would be directly in front of their business storefront for increased outdoor use as opposed to parking spaces. And what I saw in Boulder, they did not have concrete barriers. They didn't have traffic control set up outside of the normal traffic control situation they have in their downtown. And they do have a circulating one-way street that goes around their downtown as well, which is interesting. So it's not a all too unsimilar situation than us. Their downtown is significantly more densely developed and populated than ours, but Norman is a significantly bigger city than Boulder, so overall. So anyway, that was just the best example I've seen, that they didn't seem to be having to go through some of those extensive things that Sean mentioned, which I think would be valid concerns as well. and I would definitely want to work with downtown and Main Street, but even it doesn't have to necessarily be downtown Campus Corner. It could be any restaurant that's in any strip mall that may have limited indoor capacity right now and may want to use some of those parking spaces in that giant parking lot out front of their strip mall for that. So I could see this being useful to restaurants and businesses all over Norman, really. So again, the intent for me is not to close the streets down or anything like that, like a special event, but to find a way to allow this to happen in front of businesses. So are there any other comments?
I absolutely,
yeah.
I like this idea.
Councilor Patron. Yeah.
I was just
Okay.
saying, I really like this idea. I mean, in my ward, I can definitely see, where I would be more apt to eat out, and right now I just don't because of COVID. So I would be
Same here.
much more apt to go and eat out if I could eat outside.
Okay.
So I like this. Maybe we can think of something citywide like that.
Thank you. Councilmember Peacock.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of what both Sean and Holman said. Yeah, you could do concrete barriers on a project like this, but I think it's only going to be successful if you do something that's more pedestrian friendly and it's not so harsh and brutal and hard concrete, but something that fits more in with the streetscape already. And there's a lot of lower cost alternatives, I think, that we could explore. Like I saw sandbags and big barrels in the photos. I think, that's relatively cheap. That's just manpower. So I'd be happy to talk about that.
Planters, flower pots.
Okay, does any other council members have anything to add? Mayor Clark? I can't see everybody, so I don't know if hands are up. Okay.
I don't see anything, Stephen.
Okay. Let's see then. Sarah, do you have anything you'd like to add?
No, not at the moment. I think we've kind of covered all the bases. I have had some conversations with the Campus Corner merchants, and they were kind of looking at doing more like an event type based street closure kind of thing to put out tables. They were talking about doing that initially a couple weekends ago in conjunction with the sidewalk sale. They decided they didn't want to do it because it's too hot, but I think they might want to revisit that during the cooler fall, hopefully. And so, we've just been in conversations. I think there might be a couple of restaurants in downtown who might be interested in it. And again, it's kind of a handful. And I agree. I think there's some great opportunities for like freestanding, restaurants located in strip malls to do that. I don't know what they need for us for their own private parking lots. So that might be a Sean question or an Angela question. But yeah, any of the restaurants that if you talk to them or retailers, have them reach out to me, and I'm happy to start having that conversation. We haven't had as many talk to us about it, and I've been in, all the downtowners and Campus Corner meetings that they've had. So if you guys have spoken to some of those people, please send them to me, and I'll chat with them.
Appreciate that, Sarah. That it is definitely something, again, that I've just noticed. A recent trip I took, several cities I drove throughout their downtowns, even some strip malls that I saw on the outer edges. They had there was an IHOP I went by where there was no seating on the inside. They had turned their entire outside parking lot they put a giant tent over it, and it was open, and they set up tables out there and did that. So I definitely seen it happening in a whole bunch of different settings. And so kind of just want to find a path that allows our businesses to do this, to maybe give them some little relief from capacity or issues they might be having. And then especially with students and more people coming back to Norman in the next few weeks, and mention game days and things like that, the less people we can have indoors and enclosed spaces, the better. And so I don't know if a specific type of policy, I guess maybe some more research on what Boulder and maybe some of those other cities are doing, that they aren't having to do all these traffic calming things to address it. So I don't know if we can come back to this committee next month. I hate to wait another month to allow businesses to do this, but I don't know if there might be an opinion about that.
We can always keep working on it and send something out to council as a whole prior to next month's meeting.
I think I would prefer that, and everybody can kind of weigh in on what they think, and if we need further.
I don't think I don't think there's very much keeping private businesses from using their private parking lots. There's very little city regulations for that. That's a public safety thing if they want to put up a tent or a greenhouse, that sort of thing. But there's nothing keeping them from just doing that tomorrow morning if they wish.
So more so, this would really be more so focused around our public restaurants that their only parking is our public city parking.
Exactly. It's a use of that public right of way, the loss of parking, and then these again, we sure wouldn't want a car running into these tables and chairs. We do have to figure out a way to keep them safe.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, yeah, I would like for us to maybe get some more information about what some of these other cities are doing, their specific policies on it, and send that out to the whole council, and we can kind of weigh in if we want to talk about it in CPT or a study session or how we'd like to proceed. So does that work for everybody? Okay.
Consider it done.
Okay. Then if that's it on that one, our last item on the agenda is just a miscellaneous discussion. Does anybody have any comments or questions they'd like to ask about CPT stuff? Don't see any from anybody? Okay. Well, then I would just remind everybody this committee meeting every month is an opportunity to ask questions, make comments about public transit. We get a lot of questions about public transit in Norman, and especially since we took over the system. And if you know of bus stops that don't have shelters, benches, signage, anything that you think needs to be improved, please feel free to contact your council member, and we can make sure that that issue gets brought up in this committee, and we will try to address it as best as we can. So I appreciate everybody tuning in today. I hope it was an informative discussion for those watching and everybody involved. So with that, I will go ahead and adjourn the meeting so that staff can get prepared for the next meeting here at 5:45. So, all right, meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Stephen.